Yes, it is episode 27 of the Exit Philosophy podcast. He is Richard Griffin. Griff, I'm Scott MacArthur. You can call me Scotty Mac, and we're pleased to be back with you after a week's layoff. So we haven't talked to you in a couple of weeks. We'll get into the why of that in just a moment. Blue Jays offseason, general managers meetings, a World Series recap, a little tribute to Joey Votto, all ahead. But Griff, we thought as we sit here on Monday, November the 6th, ahead of Remembrance Day in Canada, Veterans Day in the United States on Saturday, November the 11th, that we would first acknowledge that very important date and get into some tributes here as both you and I are wearing our poppies today.
Yeah, that's it's a very important time, and I mean, I know that you have some family members you want to talk about that were affected and for whom you wear the poppy.
Yeah, so I up until this year, now, you know, we wear the poppy in remembrance in general. So, but from a personal perspective, up until this year, I thought I was wearing it only from a personal perspective for my two grandfathers and my grandmothers who held the fort back here at home, because both served in the Second World War. And in fact, my dad's dad was torpedoed off the coast of Normandy on D-Day. And he very fortunately survived. I mean, quite frankly, I wouldn't exist if he hadn't, because only two of his four children had been born at the time, and my dad was the fourth of the four. So he was torpedoed on D-Day, and he was on a ship. He was a medical officer in the Air Force, but he was on a ship. My grandfather was a doctor, and he was shot up into the air, came crashing back down onto the deck, and suffered from back problems for the rest of his life as a result. We presume that that was where his back problems originated. He would have been 30 going on 31 years old on D-Day, so still a very young man. So I wear the poppy in tribute to both of my sets of grandparents, but with the help of a very good friend, I've been going through my mother's family's history. And one of the things we used to like to tease my grandfather about, my mother's father about, was his kind of different and unique first name. Now, nobody ever called him by his first name, but his name in full was Obray, O-B-R-A-Y, Obray William Thomas Nichols. But everybody would call him Nick. Obviously, Nick Nichols, right? Short form for his last name. And he never told us why his first name was Obray. And we wonder, as he's long gone now, but we wonder if he maybe never knew. Well, it turns out, with the help of my friend and going through my mom's family's history, my great-grandfather, my grandfather's father, had a brother whose first name was Obray, who served in the First World War and who was killed in theater in France at the age of 20 in 1918. And so we presume, we can't confirm it, but we presume that my great-grandfather Clifford named his only son, my grandfather, Obray, after his brother, Obray, who was killed in the First World War about 5 years before my grandfather was born. So my grandfather had an uncle for whom he was named. And again, Obray, Private Obray Nichols, was only 20 years old when he was killed in the First World War in France. And the poppy is an acknowledgement of remembrance for all who have served, but it is specifically for those who were killed in action in the First World War. And I found out about a month ago that I have a great uncle, Aubrey Nichols, Private Aubrey Nichols, who was killed in theater in the First World War.
My remembrance of this, of why we wear the poppy, is my uncle Patrick Devine, who was 19 when he joined. He was killed coming back from the front line just at the end of the war. He was in a tank. They went over a mine, and he was killed immediately. And there's been a whole generations of Patrick, including my son and my brother. And that's what we wear it for.
And so your son Patrick is named after him and your brother.
Correct. Yeah. And in the Devine family, there's more Patricks than you can shake a stick at. It's very confusing. There's Patricks all over the place, but they're all named after my uncle, who was the youngest in the family, in the Devine family, and that's my mother's family.
Yes. So we think of all of those who have served, and especially all of those who have given their lives in defending freedom, fighting fascism around the world. And we thank you for your service, and we will remember you and honor you, especially on Saturday, Remembrance Day in Canada, Veterans Day in the United States. So Griff, as we didn't do a show last week, and I did get some DMs. I don't know if you did, but I got some DMs, and I got some texts from friends who do have my number, who said, is an episode dropping? Did I miss something? And I said, no. Some scheduling things have come up, and we just have to skip this week, but we do intend to be back on Monday. So some things did come up, and I'll leave you with the floor to share what you'd like.
Yeah, we were scheduled to do, after Game 5, do a World Series wrap-up, so it was midweek. And I had some issues health-wise. I was having shortness of breath and other things. And so Debbie was going to the Joseph Brand Hospital, so I went with her and took a stress test to see what was up. And after about two minutes on the treadmill, the staff said, we're going to stop you right here. Unless you're a Kenyan marathoner, your heart rate just dropped after 2 minutes of exercise. And I went, well, I'm not. And I think that's a good idea, because I couldn't go on anyway. I was so out of breath. And it turns out that they kept me in hospital for 80 hours. I just got home, as we're speaking Monday, I got home Sunday evening in time for the second half of the Cowboys and Eagles game. And they installed what I like to call a cardio enhancer, what used to be known as a pacemaker. And if I hadn't gone in, who knows what would have happened. They talked about the electrical disconnect between my heart and everything else that needs to work. And I mean, God bless them. God bless Dr. Hung, who did the surgery. God bless those who go to see their doctor. I went 5-6 years without going to see a doctor. So in short, I would just advise everybody, no matter how healthy they think they are, no matter how immortal they think they are, right here, I thought so, that seeing the doctor regularly, going for checkups, going for tests is the only way. And that's why I'm sitting here, and that's why we're moving forward with episode 27.
Yeah, well, we'll peel the curtain back just a little bit, because you scared the crap out of me, Griff, because we had talked on Wednesday morning, and we said, look, Game 5 is tonight, so this thing is either going to end or Arizona will extend it, and Thursday will be an off day, and whatever we talk about with regard to the World Series won't date until late Friday night, right? Once Game 6 is played. Why don't we just record on Thursday in the event that Texas wins it, which of course Texas won it. And you said, yeah, but can we do it in the afternoon? Because I'm just going in for some old man tests. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't look at Griff as an old man, but maybe there's some old man tests there. And I just thought it was just a normal sort of checkup for you, because that's how you described it. And then the next day you're like, yeah, we got to put this on hold. And it was scary. So just thank goodness you're well. Thank
And
goodness you got it addressed.
yeah,
And
thanks for your patience, Scotty. And for all our listeners, thanks for your patience. And you will have to deal with us for as long as we decide to keep going, because my health is 100%.
yeah,
But
I mean,
I will see doctors regularly now. I've learned my lesson. I would say for the last 20 years, I've maybe made 4 doctor visits. And Debbie's always getting on me and saying, and I say, I feel great. I feel 100%, but I wasn't. Finally went in only because she was going in, did a stress test, and voila, the rest is history. I got like a new connection. The electrician, Dr. Hung, went in and took care of me. So, but I just want people to know it wasn't the excitement of the World Series that set me back. Let's talk about the World Series, because that was, I think, in Griff's The Pitch, I did a pretty good World Series preview, and then suggested that Arizona would win in 7 because I had no faith in the Texas bullpen. I mean, we had talked about that previously. The Texas bullpen was their Achilles heel, and especially Aroldis Chapman. And he seemed to be called upon in the 8th inning, but they cut back on the bullpen, on the extra bullpen guys. They went to 3 guys that they would rely on. They brought them in. They rode them like rented mules through the World Series, and that was the difference. And when I look at the 2001 Diamondbacks that won the World Series over the Yankees, and they were relying on Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling, I don't think there's any comparison between that and Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly. And so I was wrong. I trusted too much in the failure of the Rangers bullpen. And I love Bruce Bochy, and congratulations to the Rangers. What were your thoughts on it?
Well, I'm just sitting here amused, Griff, because you rode the Texas Rangers to
success.
I did. All the way to the World Series.
But all this happened set me off.
And I predicted their demise in every round up to the World Series and looked like an ass doing it. And then I said to myself, well, Texas is going to win this thing. I mean, I don't believe in team of destiny stuff or whatever, but they're better than the Arizona Diamondbacks, and they're hitting the hell out of the baseball. They're going to win the World Series. Now, I didn't post that to X or tweet it to Twitter, which was my own little silent way of saying, because I had done my predictions for each round up to that point, but it was my silent way of saying, I cannot even feign the slightest bit of interest in this, so I'm not even going to make a prediction publicly. But I thought Texas was going to win.
Why I should have gone with the Rangers instead of switching at the last minute, and like you said, I rode the Rangers through the first 3 rounds, is that the Rangers came to Rogers Center and just swept through 4 games, 4-0 in that series. They didn't have Adolis Garcia or Josh Young, and yet they swept 4 games. And earlier in the summer, the Jays had taken 3 straight from the Diamondbacks. So I should have used that as the barometer, but I didn't, because of my dislike and disdain for Aroldis Chapman.
Let me throw this one at you, because he was World Series MVP, which means he's twice been World Series MVP. And Corey Seager, Griff, if you look at his personal accolades, is starting to rack them up, especially when it counts the most. And I know people have certain perspectives on the 2020 season, COVID, 60 games, blah, blah, blah. But he was the World Series MVP. Funny enough, playing in that new Rangers stadium for the Dodgers. And then as the World Series MVP, had an awesome season when he was healthy for the Rangers this year. So when you consider 2-time world champion, 2-time World Series MVP, I think he's got an MVP in his past. He's got a Rookie of the Year in his past as well. An award, of course, you can only win once. If he's a guy who spends the next 7 or 8 years with an OPS between 780 and 820, Now, keep in mind, he had a better than 1,000 OPS this year. So I'm talking about a downgrade. I think there's a very fair argument to make that Corey Seager, even if he comes down to some kind of statistical norm by his standard, Corey Seager's going to the Hall.
Oh, I'd have to agree with that. And, you think about the progression of the Texas Rangers when they lost 100+ games, and then they went out and signed Corey Seager and Marcus Semien, and everyone, well, they still can't pitch, and they've got these two guys. But for the last 2 years, those guys have batted 1-2 in the order and played all the time. I think Seager was hurt a little bit this summer, but you put those two guys at the top of your lineup every day. And then this year, after losing 90+ last year, this year they add all the pitching. And when Jacob deGrom went down early in the season, everybody, they're done. But they had that feeling that this was the year, and they had youngsters step up. Evans,
Evan Carter,
Evan Carter, young, and Adolis Garcia had only started to be Adolis Garcia 2 years ago. They had those guys step up and lead to join Seager and Semien, and the catching with the kid from Buffalo, Jonah Heim, and they just didn't stop acquiring because they had that feeling that this was a year that they could contend. And to just take a victory lap here, I went back to my March 28th power rankings, and I suggested that with the addition of the pitching that they did, don't look past the Texas Rangers. So I'll pat myself on the back, except I can't lift my shoulder post-surgery. So
pain at the incision point?
Oh, yeah. I'm not on anything, although people accuse me all the time of being.
Poor you.
Yeah.
Poor you. Well, here's the thing. I just love the aggression. And by the way, this happened long before they got to the World Series. This was happening when they were popping champagne for winning a wild card. But if you got 26 guys in a clubhouse chanting CY, 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 which is Chris Young's initials, their general manager. Chris Young is approximately 8'5". You may remember him as one of the tallest pitchers to ever play in Major League Baseball, and he was still active like within the last decade. Had a decent career. I always talk about culture being a testimony of the people on the ground floor, as opposed to culture being the edict or the commandment of the people at the top looking down. You get 26 guys in a room chanting the general manager's initials. That's culture, man. You get Bruce Bochy giving these epic, very short but epic post-series before the champagne bottles pop. We're on to the next round, and congratulations, and this is the best ride I've been on, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, that's what it's all about. And Chris Young, I think in part, he can obviously relate to players having played himself, but they also look around and see what he did. Okay, so Jacob deGrom gets way too much money, not for his talent, maybe underpaid even for his talent, but in terms of injury history and injury risk, you had to know what you were getting into. And, he goes down. Well, what does Chris Young do? He doesn't sit on his thumbs and go, well, woe is us. He goes and gets Max Scherzer. He also goes and gets Jordan Montgomery from the St. Louis Cardinals. Montgomery is like the glue that held that starting rotation together. He stepped in and became an ace because Scherzer got injured in Toronto in the second week or first week of September, whenever it was they were here, the Rangers, and only pitches one more time, and that's in the World Series, and he's got the back thing that flares up on him in the World Series, and then he's shut down. And even though he probably wouldn't have pitched again until a Game 7 in the World Series, if there was one, you could have looked around and said, well, geez, we're still another player short here and blah, blah, blah. They lose Garcia to the oblique on a relatively innocent looking swing. They just, that's complimentary there. That's everything working in concert. You got a front office that is showing you it will go all in to give you the tools you need to win. And then that's the players responding by playing their very best and going all in at the most important time of year.
And it shows the difference. To me, it shows the difference between the marathon and the sprint, because they were able to just shelve guys like Chris Stratton, and Aroldis became a 3-batter guy. If you had 2 lefties coming up, he would come in and just face those 3 guys, and then no matter what, he would be taken out. And so in the sprint, you're able to do that because you have another 4 months before you got to go to spring training. So, rest up after the World Series. And I didn't take that into account when I was suggesting that the Rangers bullpen would be their Achilles heel in the World Series, because they only used the guys that were performing. And that's a Bruce Bochy thing. And Bruce Bochy, to me, combined analytics and personal experience and gut feel as to maybe extending a reliever into the next inning if he had pitched few innings or throwing few pitches and was ready to take on another 2 or 3 hitters. And that's something that the pure analytics teams don't take into account.
Yeah. Well, it's like, hey, if we wear you out in this series, you got 4 months.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Until spring training.
Yep.
The other thing, Griff, and you and I were going back and forth about this last week. Don't need to spend necessarily too much time on it, but perception and optics in anything always fascinate me. The Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is the 4th largest television market in the United States, behind the 3 obvious ones: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. The Texas Rangers are Dallas's baseball team. They play in the suburb of Arlington, but they're Dallas's baseball team. But does anybody outside of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, or other people in parts of Texas who cheer for the Rangers and not the Astros, think of them that way or perceive them that way? I remember being a little kid, and I guess I could have just asked my parents. I never did. Guess I didn't care that much. But I would always say to myself, why doesn't, like, the Dallas Cowboys are the most famous NFL team, much to my chagrin, in the world. Why doesn't Dallas have a Major League Baseball team? Well, turns out they do. But as a little kid, and at even maybe a teenager, I didn't know Arlington was right near Dallas. And so it just, it didn't have cachet, a Rangers Diamondbacks World Series. It didn't have a big time feel. There are excellent players on both teams, predominantly Texas, with a star player like Corey Seager. We know Marcus Semien in Toronto and in Canada from his year with the Blue Jays. But it didn't have a large degree of cachet that you would assume a Dallas team would bring to the table.
Yeah, I think Arte Moreno, who purchased the Angels, came to that conclusion when they were the Anaheim Angels, and before that they were the California Angels, and then for a while they were the LA Angels when they played at the Coliseum. But Arte Moreno came to that conclusion, and even though Anaheim is much farther away from Los Angeles than Arlington is, tucked in between Dallas and Fort Worth, he rebranded the Angels as the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, which is ridiculous, except that it's a shrewd business move to be at one of the 3 major U.S. markets and to label yourself as such. The Florida Marlins ownership decided they're better off as the Miami Marlins because Tampa Bay already was there. And it's the same thing. I agree with you 100%, but I don't think that, just moving on, I don't think that was the cause of the low ratings. I think it was 8.5 million average, and it used to be up to 40 million when there was only 3 networks and it was going on. Like, you look at the NBA finals from 23, and it was an average of 11.6 million per game in the NBA championship. And this one, between 2 regional teams, the Arizona Diamondbacks, Texas, first time that 2 states have played each other in the World Series, like in terms of team name. And that could have accounted for some of it, as you so eloquently outlined. But what's your thought on the ratings being almost a record low?
Well, look, Griff, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you or lie to our listeners. I did not watch every inning of that World Series. I just didn't. It just, like, sorry. Sometimes I had other plans and I wasn't going to scratch them to sit there and watch that. Now, that is not to be disrespectful to Torey Lovello or Bruce Bochy or to Corey Seager or Gabriel Moreno or, Zach Gallen or Jordan Montgomery. It just, there is zero needle moved here. And I had expressed in our most recent episode a couple weeks ago how much I thought it was important for the sport that Philadelphia got to the World Series, and they were in the middle of their series with the Diamondbacks. And I think when we talked, Griff, they were looking quite good.
Yeah, they were
to advance at the time. I mean, they went home leading 3-2 and then dropped the final 2 of that series to the Diamondbacks. But I thought they needed the Northeastern market. The Phillies have obviously a devout following. They have star power with Bryce Harper. I just thought they needed it. And I would have been more likely to have watched more than I did if the Phillies were there. What do you know? And you know more. We follow the sport, talk to people, etc. But like, what do we really know about the Arizona Diamondbacks, and how much do we really care to find out? Number one. Number two, and it's always interesting, if you're like 20 years old and listening to this, and you've already insisted to yourself or somebody that you're never going to be that person that says, back at my day, trust me, when you get to my age, mid-40s, Griff, who's, 5-10 years older than me, you do get a little get off my lawn-ish with some stuff. And I'm all about progressive approaches and all about changing things when things need to be changed. I understand the internet exists. Heck, without the internet, we wouldn't be doing a podcast right now. But there's no secrets anymore. When I was a kid and I'd watch an all-star game and see all the players in their different uniforms, it was like my one time of the year to see Tony Gwynn, because Padres games were never on television. It was a mystery. He played way out on the West Coast, blah, blah, blah. I was an American League fan following the Blue Jays in Toronto. And so there's that. And then the leagues are just kind of the same now. And I get it. Nobody wants to see bad hitting pitchers, but there's no difference anymore. So it's just kind of like, and all the teams play each other in the regular season now with this new schedule. It's just kind of like, okay, all right.
Yeah,
all of that.
I would agree with that. And when the All-Star game in baseball was invented in 1936, I think it was because American League fans never got to see National League players. So this was an opportunity for you to see the other league. And it was the same thing with the World Series. The World Series, even through the 4 divisions, when in 1969, when the Expos and Padres came in, and I think it was the Royals and Mariners, or the Royals and whatever.
Pilots,
yeah. That was still similar, because after one round, you got to see the other league, and it still had some panache. But when you got into multi divisions, wild cards, when you got into 3 rounds of playoffs, it became different. And when you got into interleague, it became far different. And as you pointed out, you got a chance to see the other league all the time. And an additional factor, which should be pointed out in the last several years, is legalized gambling. Nobody knew anything about the 2 World Series teams. So if you have money to bet, you're betting on the NFL, you're betting on the NHL, you're betting on college football, you're betting on, and you're watching those on TV. You're not watching something that you don't have a financial interest in. This generation of sports fan I'm talking about. Right. And the fact that, as you point out, both leagues are now the same. Nobody cares anymore about this rivalry, and we're going to see them in the World Series. No, because you saw them. We even talked about it. The Diamondbacks coming into Toronto and being swept. You know, you're familiar with everyone. You're familiar with sports highlights. So I think gambling and the watered down playoffs, and they traded that off for the month of September to make it more interesting, create more fan interest. And I agree with that. There were 20 teams in September still in the hunt, and it was good at the league, at the team level, at the city level. But it does affect the playoffs, and it did affect the World Series. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, anyway, I mean, it was what it was. Congratulations to the Texas Rangers, first-time world champions in their 61-year history. And you'd know better than me, Griff. That includes their incarnation as the Washington Senators. There are a bunch of Washington Senators running around, right? The Minnesota Twins were the Senators.
The only Senators team that did anything was the one that went to Minnesota eventually. So this Texas Rangers, Washington Senators had never won.
Right.
Never. Yeah.
And then the Washington Nationals did in 2019. Joey Votto. So go to Joey Votto's X account, Twitter account, and take a look at his almost 4-minute video where he's clearly unscripted. You can tell he's trying to hold back tears, but he's just, he's back in the Toronto area and maybe up in Muskoka, Griff, because he's got the Muskoka chair.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, here in the Maritimes, we call them Adirondack chairs, right? That's a very Ontario thing to call them Muskoka chairs, hence the whole Muskoka being an Ontario part. So they're Adirondack chairs out here. If you're listening on the East Coast, a Muskoka chair in Ontario, and you can see his breath, and there's a tree with yellow and orange leaves behind him. So we know it's current, it's fall, it's autumn. He's talking. And his option was declined by the Cincinnati Reds, bringing an end to a wonderful 2-decade plus tenure in that organization, 17 of which were played at a very elite level for the Reds. And
as he sat down in that Muskoka chair, he said, "Happy Sunday morning." And it was 8:30 when I saw it on X.
There you go. Yeah.
And he just heard the news on Saturday, and there was no one else around for this taping of his tribute to the city of Cincinnati and to the fans there. I thought it was touching and brilliant.
Yeah. What was cool too, like, because I was trying to figure it out, Griff, is that what I read, C. Trent Rosecrans in The Athletic, who's a longtime Reds beat writer, awesome guy, does awesome work. He had written that, is it Nick Kroll, who's the front office, longtime Reds front office guy who's now essentially running the show there. Nick was quoted as having reached Votto in Spain, so to let him know that they weren't going to pick up the option. So I'm thinking, like, well, when did Joey get back? And anyway, it doesn't matter. But it was, and he was joking about how 17 years in, he would still sometimes get lost on the streets in Cincinnati trying to get to the ballpark, and didn't know some of the street names, and the Maps app didn't always work for him. But man, he's just a real dude. He's clearly introverted, clearly dedicated to his craft, clearly turned himself into the best version of not only himself, but of a baseball player. There are all those great videos of him in the on-deck circle interacting with kids who were sitting near the dugout before he'd come up to the plate. He's a guy who found fun in the sport in his own way, Griff. And I think as time went on, he opened himself up more and more and really almost gained a cult following that way.
Yeah, I think I know the first time I wrote a column about him was at the World Baseball Classic when they had the first round at Rogers Center, and I forget what year it was, 13 or no, it must have been earlier than that, because he wasn't a regular player, and he had come home with Team Canada, stayed at his mom's in Brampton, and when I talked to him in the home dugout for the column, I didn't know anything about him before talking to him. Bob Elliott knew everything about him, but I didn't. And he had just taken the GO train to get to the ballpark. I said, did anyone recognize you? No. So, maybe in Cincinnati could have solved some of his directional issues by taking public transport. But yeah, to me, it would not be a bad idea to sign Joey Votto for the Blue Jays for 1 year with an option maybe, because he is Brandon Belt minus the strikeouts. And in terms of leadership and example and community, there's no downside to having a Joey Votto in that clubhouse. And I don't know how much it would cost. I know he's coming off a pretty big contract, well, a huge contract at the time that he signed with the Reds, but to play 1 year plus before retiring, before packing it in, I think it would be worth talking to him about. And a left-handed hitting first baseman DH, that was Brandon Belt. And Brandon Belt, to me, he was on pace for a full season to strike out 240 times, and you're not going to get that from Joey Votto. And even though the personality that Brandon Belt brought with him to the Blue Jays clubhouse was important inside the clubhouse, externally, it was a non-factor among the fans. And the fans, I think, as we've discussed in the past, the fans need something to get them back on board for the 2024 season, which, the expectations are so high with this Blue Jays team for 2023 that even 89 wins was a huge disappointment. And another first round of the playoffs knockout was a huge disappointment. And you would think, listening to the fan base, that this team had won in the 70s in terms of number of games.
Yeah, I mean, where I can buy in on the idea of bringing Votto to the Blue Jays, Griff, is in the Albert Pujols comparison. And I know the situation is a little different, that for Pujols, it was a return to St. Louis for his final year, where it all began and where his best seasons were. Albert Pujols is a Hall of Famer for what he accomplished with the Cardinals. If you look at his LA Angels numbers, it was really only the first 2 or 3 seasons he was there that he was an above average player.
Yeah, he was in his women out there for sure.
He was in his decline. And he found, I don't know if he went on the Tom Brady diet or something, but Pujols was a hell of a player for the Cardinals. It wasn't just a victory lap to say goodbye. He was a good player for St. Louis in 2022 in his final year. Different with Joey in that it would not be a return to Toronto to play for the Blue Jays, but it would be a return to Toronto to play at home after a Hall of Fame career with one other organization, the Cincinnati Reds. And is there a little bit of a fountain of youth reinvigoration for Joey, coming off a couple of down years by his standards that also included some significant injuries that impacted his playing time? He will be 40 next year, going on 41. He will turn 41 in 2024. Is there maybe a bit of a fountain of youth? You could sell me on that. But given the offensive issues that this team had this past season, Griff, you got to make sure the people you're bringing in to address the holes in your lineup are going to be able to hold up and be plus hitters.
The thing about having a Votto on board is that whenever the Blue Jays, we all know, like to use the DH position to rest, to get some of their hitters off their feet, to get Vlad off his feet, to get Bo off his feet, to get George Springer off his feet. And those are the days with a left-handed starter where you can make one of those guys the DH, sit Votto, or if it's Vlad that's getting the day off as a DH, then Votto can play first base. He plays a better first base than people imagine. So I see that, and at the right cost, to me, it would be at least worth exploring, because he wants to play regularly still. But if he goes out into the free agent market and finds out that that's not an option, that there's no team out there that wants to play him every day, then he goes to plan B, which would include, to me, getting, I don't know, 110, 120 games, with most of them being in the starting lineup. I could see that as an option for him once he goes out to explore the market. And, you know, if it fits, the Blue Jays have $25 million estimate to reach the same payroll as they did last year. And that already takes into account the raises that are estimated to go to the arbitration guys. So $25 million, say you need to sign 3 free agents or acquire 3 players to fit in that 25 million and make this a better Blue Jays team moving forward into 2024. If he can fit into that and be one of those 3 guys, I would do it.
Quick Joey Votto story. So back in 2010, I was still working in Ottawa because I didn't move to Toronto until April of 2011 to help launch TSN 1050. So I was in, unbeknownst to me at the time, but I was in my final year at what was then the Team 1200. It's now TSN 1200 in Ottawa. And the Cubs, who people who know me best know have been my beloved team since I was a little kid, were playing a 4-game series at Dodger Stadium right before the All-Star game. And I went to SoCal on vacation. I'd never been to Los Angeles or SoCal before, so it was something I'd really wanted to do. And the Cubs playing at Dodger Stadium was a perfect excuse to do it. Well, it turns out in 2010, the All-Star game was in Anaheim. So the Cubs are playing 4 at Dodger Stadium leading into the break. And I thought to myself, well, I've already got my arrangement set up down there. I'm paying for my flights and blah, blah, blah. So I went to my boss at Team 1200 and I said, hey, maybe I can get credentialed to cover the All-Star game at Angel Stadium. And he said to me, sure, go ahead. So I got a credential. And among the funny things that happen and cool things that happen, you know, Griff, at Angel Stadium, there's obviously the dugouts leading to the clubhouses and stuff. But if you are ever watching a game, there's the big A behind home plate, and there's a gate that opens from the field, leads you down, and it's a nice little plush area underneath there. I met Larry King. He was just saying, standing around because he was there for the All-Star game. So I met Larry King. Never ask yes or no questions. Ask open-ended questions. That was always his advice. Gave it to me there.
He was wearing
anyway,
suspenders, I would imagine.
Oh, he had his suspenders on. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. By that point, he was a really thin dude. He needed something to hold those pants up, and I don't know if a belt would do it. But so that was kind of cool to meet Larry King. Anyway, that's not the point of the story. Joey Votto was in his 2010 MVP season for the Reds. You know, so what did he turn? 27 in 2010. So he really burst onto the scene in 2010. And like they do in the playoffs, they set up a ballroom for the day before the All-Star game, and you could just bounce around and talk to each All-Star or any of the All-Stars you wanted to at their spots in the hotel ballrooms. And so it was National League time. met John Buck and talked to Jose Bautista for the first time because they were Blue Jays All-Stars that year. And so I go over to Votto's table, and I actually had a couple of minutes with him. And I was asking him about not just his season, but about the Reds in general. And he gave me an answer where maybe it was longer than this, maybe it was shorter than this, but I'm estimating a good 90 seconds. And I thought of this the other day because his name was back in the news. But Votto gave me an answer where he proceeded to give about 90 seconds worth of credit to the value of Paul Janisch on that 2010 Reds team. Now, Paul Janisch, Janish, just got hired by noted former Blue Jay Chris Getz in the Chicago White Sox front office because Getz just took over there. And so this made me think of it. And Votto, Janisch was like essentially a utility infielder who played some shortstop. Maybe even was the starting shortstop that year for Cincinnati.
I think
but not like
he was, yeah.
But not like a distinguished player, but a major leaguer, which means you're good, but like not relative to his peers great. But the credit that Votto was giving to other guys on his team when the spotlight was on him at the All-Star game. I didn't know Joey Votto at all at that point, still don't really, but like I just thought it said a lot about the guy that he wanted to highlight some of the lesser known players on his team while he absorbed the spotlight and the accolades at the All-Star game.
I think also, I forgot to mention, is that if Joey Votto did re-sign or sign with the Blue Jays, he'd be closer to his chess club. So he wouldn't just have to go there in the offseason. He could go there and sharpen up his game on off days.
Yeah.
But I have two questions for you moving forward here, and they're completely on a different topic. But number one, should the Jays quit babying their young players like Vlad, covering up with excuses for fans and media like it's early, their history makes us confident? Yeah, when guys get thrown out on the bases on stupid base running, admit it and say that was a dumb base running play. Or, like, to me, they don't grow up. They don't mature. I remember Dick Williams with the Expos, and he made enemies within the clubhouse by just telling the truth. And these fans in Toronto and these fans these days are sophisticated enough that if you tell the truth and then at some other point make an excuse that makes sense, they'll believe the excuse. But if you're just excusing all the time, these fans are smart enough, they see through it. And so even when you're telling the truth, it doesn't register because you've lied so many times about nobody could have avoided being picked off second base in that situation. It was just a great play. No, it wasn't. It was a stupid play by your runner who didn't pay attention and should be called out for it. What do you think?
Yeah. Okay. So, here's, as you were talking there, Griff, I thought about this and I'm like, do I really want to go there? Because there's going to be obvious pushback. And I am at a point look at my hair. If you're watching on youtube.com/exitphilosophy, do you think I'm at a point in my life where I really want to argue to the death about this? But
it's you just were talking. I'm asking for that.
No. But you were talking there, and I thought to myself, you know what? Because I've seen people post about this, and there is an opinion out there among some in the fan base they'd be okay with this, and I actually think the compromising of one game for the potential greater good could be useful early in the season. If Sleepy Vlad shows up on a night in mid-April and in his fifth full season, it'll essentially be sixth full season because he came up in early 2019. If in his sixth full season, Sleepy Vlad shows up on a Wednesday night in April of 2024 and gets picked off or something, it doesn't turns a turns a double into a single because he thinks it's a home run. Maybe on Thursday night, the next night, Vlad stapled to the pine. And I remember in Houston, and I think it was 2014. Could only been 13 or 14. I'm pretty sure it was 14 because Jose Reyes was still on the team. Edwin Encarnacion did not hustle out a ground ball one night in Houston, and the next day we got to the ballpark and he was not in the lineup. And John Gibbons did his usual thing in his office where he wouldn't answer the question. But I think we all knew why he wasn't in the lineup. And I go into the clubhouse, and Jose Reyes, whether he knew our names or not, he called all of us Poppy. And Reyes and Encarnacion were sitting beside each other at their locker stalls. And Reyes turns around, and I'm standing there with one or two others. It might have been Greg or Chisholm, whoever it was. I can't remember. It was so long ago now, and my brain's mush. But all I know is all I kept hearing was, "Hey, Poppy. Hey, Poppy." Well, Griff, my name's not Poppy, so I don't know whether Reyes is talking to me or who else. He could be talking to a teammate, could be talking. So I'm not turning around because but it kept happening enough that I figured, well, he was talking to me. And Reyes, with Edwin right there, Edwin had his back to me, but Reyes had turned around to face me in the middle of the room. "Why isn't Edwin in the lineup tonight? Have you found out why why Edwin isn't in the lineup tonight? Why?" And Edwin's sitting right there, can hear all of it. And so it just takes me back to that memory where, Gibby kind of played it coy, like, well, something must be bothering him, because he loafed down the line. So maybe there's a hammy issue or a quad issue. No, Edwin was being held to account. And I think we're at a point with Vlad where you can sacrifice what he might do on a Thursday night in April in an attempt to correct something that shouldn't be happening in August, September, or October by showing him that there are rules here.
Well, Scotty, I would have to disagree slightly with that because back in those days, the bench always included someone who could play at a comparable or near comparable level. And the lesson learned from being benched would pay off down the road. But you look at benches with major league teams today, there are no players on that bench who are going to help you win except in certain situations, maybe late inning defensively. But
but how do you want accountability? How do you want accountability?
I would say call them out and then put them in the lineup.
Okay, but does that work, Griff?
I don't know. We haven't tried it. But I do remember that one of the great rules in Ontario baseball, COBA, OBA, is the re-entry rule, which as a coach or a manager, I always made sure that there was a re-entry rule so that you could, if a guy didn't run the bases hard, or if you're at third base and waving a guy who should be rounding third and is only halfway and he gets thrown out because of that, you can take him up, put somebody else in, and if the game is on the line later, bring him back in that same spot. And I love that rule. And I don't know if I could coach without that rule because there's no other way to discipline at that level when you're only playing a 28-game season.
Well, that rule ain't coming into Major League
Baseball. That rule ain't coming into Major League Baseball. But I sort of have to side with Dick Williams on it. He made eternal enemies with Mark Langston, Steve Rogers, and others that he criticized. And I think maybe the answer is to go to the player and say, okay, you messed up. You messed up. I'm going to have to tell the media what I think. Just let the player know that you're going to call him out in the media because fans aren't stupid anymore. I mean, not that they ever were, but they don't want to hear that it's early, that, anybody would have been picked off in that situation. They don't want to hear that. And that's part of the frustration with management, with John Schneider, with Ross Atkins, with the front office, is that they don't hear what's actually happening, even though everybody knows what's actually happening.
Well, but again, like it's like I'm sitting in a wagon and you're pulling me along. You're dragging me right back into the muck, but I will come back to it and say that it starts at the top. When you hire somebody who could never possibly be a threat to you, you then empower that person to hire somebody who will never push back or be a threat to them. And that sort of mediocrity settles in. I just, I'm watching that Texas Rangers team. They won the World Series. They got hot at the right time. And I'm watching Corey Seager perform, and I'm watching Marcus Semien perform. And I know that the Blue Jays' top-end talent, Griff, is as good, in potentially better than those players. Seager's an elite player. I'm not
three
gold
gloves or 3 Gold Gloves for the Blue Jays.
But I'm yeah. But I'm sitting there and I'm like, what I'm watching here with Texas, I can't envision at this moment with the best players on the Toronto Blue Jays. I know they're capable of it. I know they have the talent to do it, but I actually can't envision them in that moment on that stage accomplishing the way the top end talent of the Texas Rangers is right now. It's possible, obviously, and I guess in a way I'm saying I can envision it because I'm acknowledging it's possible. But with what we've seen, with the approaches we've seen at the plate, et cetera, I just don't, it just is not something my brain can compute right now.
Well, the Rangers, I mean, you do need 2 position players to step up and emerge, which the Jays don't have any on the horizon. I don't consider Davis Schneider one of those guys. And you need 1 pitcher. And that could be Ricky Tiedemann in the second half of the season. Although, as you point out earlier, or off air, he's only going to be turning 22 on August the 2nd next year. So that might be a stretch. Although, who else is there? Bowden Francis could be an effective 5th starter for 5 innings. But you need more than that. You need Manoah to bounce back. Can you imagine if Manoah had a similar season to 2022, and then the other 4 starters were pitching like they were? I mean, thank God Barrios and Kikuchi bounced back to make up for the fact that Manoah stunk. But if all 5 of those guys were in high gear, 89 wins would have been the baseline for what they could have accomplished.
Well, I got to pull it up here just so that I don't get it wrong. What was Alek Manoah's wins above replacement? I know you love these stats, Griff. What was his WAR in 2022? I just want to. So he was a negative 1.1 WAR
in
2023.
Oh, okay.
So that's how bad. Like he was a loss 0.1.
Yeah.
Below a league replacement player last season. I just got to click on 2022 here on Baseball Reference to try to find his wins above replacement. I mean, for his career, he's a 7.8 wins above replacement. So he had 1.1 docked off. So he was 8.9 going into last year. He was like a 5.5, 6 WAR player in 2022. If you get Alek Manoah back to like a 4 WAR next year, Griff, he becomes like a Gosman Barrios level guy in your rotation. Like he could ascend from the 5 spot back into the mid to high part of your rotation. Well, you still got guys beneath him like Bassett throwing well. I mean, these are best case scenario situations. They absolutely need internal improvement. They need Vlad to be better, right? He was a 1-win player this year, or 1.5 or whatever the hell it was. He's got to get back to being a 4.5, 5-win player. Manoah was a negative 1-win player this year. He's got to get up to 3 or 4 next year. Somebody like him. Like
improvement. I watched Brandon Pfaadt pitch well for the Diamondbacks and pitch in the World Series. And he to me was very similar to Alek Manoah, same age, same type of stuff. 94, 95 fastball tops, but locating it was the key. Slider that he bit off the outside corner. And if Alek Manoah could become that guy, he wouldn't necessarily have to be the third guy or the fourth guy in the rotation, but a solid 5 like that would be tremendous for the Blue Jays.
But you also can't rely on it. But I mean, that would be a perfect case scenario, because then you'd have a guy like Bowden Francis who could be your 6th starter, but also throw in long relief for you and maybe do the hybrid deal.
And the thing that I noticed about Alek Manoah in the offseason is it would have been easy to see him doing workouts and like trying to show that he's getting back in shape. And that would have been one thing, because we have seen that. But to me, what's most striking is that he's wearing Blue Jays gear as he's doing it. So for those fans, for those observers who say, well, the Jays have lost him, he can afford other gear. He could get West Virginia Mountaineer gear or whatever team he played for in the Cape Cod League, but he's wearing Blue Jay gear, which to me, more than trying to figure out how much weight he's dumbbell lifting or whatever it's called. They told me not to because of my ticker, but so I'm going to stay away from the gym.
You're going to stick to the treadmill for now?
Yeah, right. But to me, that's just as important, is that he hasn't given up on the Jays. I don't think the Jays have given up on him. I think people make too much of what happened in August. I don't think the players in the clubhouse have given up on him, because they're all part of the union, and everything that happens in a major league clubhouse, it's us against them, even though it's us and us, it's us and them. And if that makes any sense. But yeah, I don't think that Manoah is a lost cause. And I think that he showed over 4 years in the minors and the majors that he can be Brandon Pfaadt. And that being the case, there's hope. And I got 2 more things I want to talk about. Okay. One of them is the GM meetings, which are taking place. I know there's a lot of questions about what the GM meetings, whether the Jays could make a deal, whether they could sign a free agent, whether they could make a trade. And that doesn't happen at the GM meetings. I went in 2019 to the same location in Scottsdale, Arizona. And there's a lot of conversation. I sat in the lobby with the agent for Kyle Gibson, who was going up to meet with the Blue Jays people. And it was a constant stream of guys going up to meet with teams, agents, even players themselves. And the discussion takes place is useful. But agents don't want to be the first guy to have somebody sign and set the bar. Nobody wants to set the bar. And Scott Boras and the Players Association want to make sure that that first major contract is a major contract. It's huge, so that everybody can play off of that. So anyone expecting results to come out of the 3 days of the winter meetings, that's not what happens. Everybody's
the GM meetings.
The GM meetings, sorry.
Yeah.
That's not what happens. Everybody's there. There's a lot of discussion going on. But, Scott Boras has clients, like he's got six of the top 9 free agents. And I do believe the Jays might be interested in 1 or 2 of them, and they have 2 of them on the way out. So it'll be interesting the end of November and through December. But Boras is a guy that likes to carry things into the new year so that he can sort of put the fear of mediocrity into GMs and take advantage of it. He likes to see the bar set before he clears it.
He won't be throwing out spreadsheets of Matt Chapman's offensive statistics from about May 15th onward.
Gold glove, baby. Gold glove.
Hey. Yeah. And even that apparently had regressed a little bit, but still, still a gold glover, still got it done. As we sit here, Griff, I know you had one more topic, but we'd be remiss. Chad Green.
Oh, yes.
So the Blue Jays have picked up Chad Green's second option that they had. So it was very convoluted. They drew up the deal because Chad Green was coming off of Tommy John surgery and didn't return to the team until September the 1st. You may recall that tipping point in late August when he entered a game mid-inning in Buffalo and showed that he could still perform in professional baseball. And
that is exactly what I'm talking about.
That's my
Don't
favorite thing.
Know the fans. Tell them you're waiting till September 1st. Not we need to see him come in the middle of it. Bring him up. That's so much.
This guy pitched in leverage for the New York Yankees in playoff games at Yankee Stadium and threw the ball well for years. But you know what?
Continue.
Now that he's back in the state of New York, we got to see him enter a game in mid-inning in Buffalo before we truly know. Yeah. Anyway, that just, I love that.
You set me off.
Yeah. It's my favorite thing. It just says everything, explains everything about everything. But so the Jays had a 3-year, $27 million club option on Green. They declined that. The ball then went into Chad's court, and he declined a 1-year, $6.25 million player option. And then there was one more club option off of that, 2 years, $21 million. The Blue Jays exercised that. So Chad Green comes back to the Blue Jays, locked in now for the next 2 years at an AAV of $10.5 million. So he's an 8-figure per year reliever. And Griff, if you're paying a guy $10.5 million, you are using him in leverage moments. I mean, as I think you head into Dunedin right now with Romano as your closer and Green as your number one setup guy, and everybody else falls in behind.
Yeah, he's clearly going to take the place largely of Jordan Hicks, even though Jordan Hicks throws a little harder. Chad Green throws hard enough. And to me, there's no way that they would have set up this contract, this convoluted, I refuse, you refuse, we accept for that last 2-year deal. They wouldn't have set the contract up that way and then have him succeed, have him come back, have him enter in the middle of an inning, show that he could do it, and then come to the major leagues and perform well. I think that first game that he came in was his worst performance. It was in Colorado, and he came in a strange situation and he gave up a couple of runs. But after that, he was lights out. And I don't think that performance would have led to him being free agent again. I think they had it in mind that would have been, because they left themselves last serve.
Right. Yes. And Griff, the contract was set up for the two sides to remain married through 2024. If Green he had the setback when Tyler Heineman's throw attempting to catch the would-be base stealer in the minor leagues dinged off Green's head, and it concussed him, and it set him back a couple weeks. But had there been arm issues or more weird stuff like that had kept him out entirely in 2023 and he never make it back, well, he had the protection of the 1-year 6.25 in 2024. So I think from both sides, it was just an understanding that this relationship was going to continue for one reason or another, one way or another, for at least one more year. So it works out well.
Yeah, absolutely. The last item that I've got to discuss, and we did it before, we discussed it before hitting record, is, and fans understand, if they've listened to all 27 episodes, they understand that we're here for the good of the team. We're here for the good of the Blue Jays, that we're not predicting, but we are recommending from a viewpoint of experience and love of the game of baseball and love of going to Rogers Center and seeing the best baseball possible, although you see most of your games on TV being a Maritimer. But my suggestion, yes, Nova Scotia is strong. My suggestion is, as a free agent, sign Tim Anderson, who would fit in that $25 million as a second baseman, and put him in there on an everyday basis, allowing him to move to the top of the order and allowing George Springer to legitimately move down to the middle of the order where he belongs, and then having Bo and Vlad and others hitting behind Tim Anderson and making the team better for 2024 and beyond, and giving the team a slight edge that they haven't had, a veteran who has performed at the highest levels and who doesn't celebrate home runs with jackets or tridents or Viking helmets or whatever. This guy just wants to play baseball and win. And he's coming off a down year with the White Sox, but is a hell of a player and a hell of a clubhouse member, that clubhouse that needs improvement. And that's my suggestion. It's not,
So
not a prediction, it's a suggestion.
Are you confident that Tim Anderson is bounce backable?
Yes.
Because Griff, it was really bad this year in 2023. Like, you know, he was a -2 WAR player. He was 40% worse than the league average hitter. If you go by OPS plus, like he was a 60 where the league average is 100. Now he's had a lot of good years. I mean,
and it's a perfect opportunity for a guy to try and rebuild his brand. And that would be a shorter term deal, maybe another one of those 1 year and an option. And a player can decline that second year option. But I think he's a guy who needs to rebuild himself before signing what he thinks he deserves as a free agent. And the Jays should step in.
Well, they definitely, they bring some intensity. They bring some life. They bring an edge, not just to the clubhouse, Griff. I mean, Tim Anderson's got a history. There'd be an edge on the field, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what this team, I think fans would agree that this team needs somewhat of an edge. There's too many nice guys. There's too many great stories about helping ladies across the street, and we don't need that.
My only question, though, would be that, and nothing ever falls at one person's feet, but there were a lot of articles written and a lot of reports about the rudderless ship that was the Chicago White Sox, that there were essentially no rules in that clubhouse, that they were not pulling on the same rope in the same direction. And so I'm hesitant to ascribe any kind of leadership to anybody who was a part of that team last year.
But perhaps, in my opinion, perhaps that there was a contributing factor in his failed performance, is that he could not excel in that environment and didn't have the ability to correct it as the team went spiraling down through the standings.
Tim Anderson in Toronto.
And Joey Votto.
OJ's starting second, Joey Votto and Tim Anderson. I'm still on the Cody Bellinger wagon.
Yeah, I know you are. And that'll take out the entire $25 million that we project is going to be available just to meet last year's payroll.
Well, not only that, Marcus Stroman declined his player option. So that frees up. The Cubs may have put this on the books and anticipated it already, but that frees up what would have been a $21 million commitment to Marcus Stroman in 2024 had Stroman picked up the option. So you got to take that $21 million, and that's the starting point for going forward with Cody Bellinger. I don't think the Cubs have any excuse to not return him to Wrigley Field for the long term. So there's that. And I'm also on the Michael A. Taylor wagon, which is a lot less of a sexy signing, but we talked about this before. And we know that Dalton Varsho can't hit left-handed pitching. And Michael A. Taylor hit more than 20 home runs for the Minnesota Twins this year. He's a right-handed hitter. He plays a center field to the level of Varsho, almost to the level of Byron Buxton, his soon-to-be ex-teammate in Minnesota. And the guy he took over for when Buxton got hurt in early August. Taylor would continue to help, if you're staying on the run prevention train, he helps you there. And he's a guy you could play against left-handed pitchers and use as a defensive replacement otherwise, or have him pinch hit against a tough lefty reliever late in a ball game and then throw him into an outfield spot.
Plenty of recommendations from Exit Philosophy, and plenty more to come as the weeks go along, and we don't miss a week like we did last week.
Yeah, well, we're on our health, and we are wearing our poppies in remembrance of those who've given their lives in service to our country. So we'll be thinking of everyone on Remembrance Day, Veterans Day in the United States. And Griff, we are on schedule to be back next Monday, and we'll look forward to that here on Exit Philosophy. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks, Scotty, and thanks, everyone. And don't forget to see your care provider and make sure that it's a regular visit.
Amen.